So ready for the next step for our sew along. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our button plackets, we're going to fold it in half, right sides together, and sew a 1/2 inch seam along this edge. So once you've done that, you're going to want to pink that seam, turn it inside and press it so we got a nice crisp corner like this. And then we're ready to attach it to our skirt. So we're going to take our skirt and our placket, and the sewn edge is going to go on the top. We're just going to match those seams, pin on there. And then we're just going to take our placket and sew all the way down to the bottom. So once we got our placket attached, we're going to want to press this seam, and you want to make sure that the seam allowance is going into the placket and not out of the placket. Into the placket. Just want that to be a nice crisp seam there. We are going to press under our 1/2 inch seam allowance. And at the same time, we're going to press this edge so we get a nice crisp mark. And what you can do is you can just take your seam allowance and match it up to the length of the seam allowance that you sewed on the other side of the placket. If you are uber duper type A, use a ruler. Now mine is getting a little lump here at the corner, so I'm just going to come in and trim off a little bit of the bulk in that corner area. You don't have lumpy things. There we go. Much less lumpy. Alright, and then we're going to do the exact same thing to the other side of our placket. You can go ahead and pin this down almost all the way to the bottom. We're going to leave the bottom free for a second because we're going to do our hem first before we slip stitch this edge off. Stay. So to start the hem, we're going to take our button placket and we're going to flip it inside out so that we have right sides together. See, we have our seam allowance still folded down in this side. Again, making sure this seam allowance is pointing into the placket, not out of the placket. Going to pin that, and then we're just going to sew a line at our hem allowance. Now in my pattern that I drafted, I allowed for 1 inch of hem, so I'm going to sew along at 1 inch, and we want to do this to both sides of our skirt. So before we start pressing up our hem, we want to remove some of the bulk in this area. Alright, so I'm going to take this inside section, not the section that's connected to the longer part of the skirt, but the facing section, and I'm just going to take my pinking shears, just kind of trim a little bit of that off, and then also going the other direction. Trim a little bit of that off. So we have less bulk there, and we're going to turn grabbing our handy dandy hair chopsticks / corner poker, and we can see that we have a nice crisp corner. We want to press that. If your corner is lumpy, then you're probably going to need to cut some more out. So you can take that and just give it a good press. And it's going to line up nicely so that your seam allowance is still tucked under for when we're ready to slip stitch down our button placket. And then we're going to press 1 inch seam, or however much seam you had, all the way to the other skirt till we get to the other corner, and we're going to do the same thing on this corner that we did to the other corner. So once you have your hem allowance pressed up, we're going to fold under and press again. And then you pin along as you press, and then your hem will stay good. Now my hem allowance is 1 inch, so if I fold her in a 1/2 inch, I'm going to have a 1/2 inch here. If you used a more generous hem allowance, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever, you don't have to fold it all the way down halfway. You can fold it just about a 1/2 inch under and press, and then you'll have a wider band of that right side of the fabric on the inside of your hem. So generally, if you have a bigger hem, you don't need to sew under more than a 1/2 inch. Alright, so now I have my hem is pressed and pinned, and it's time to sew. So your hem you can stitch by machine or by hand, whichever you prefer. And then when you're done with that, you want to slip stitch by hand down the loose edges of your button placket. Alright, and then we'll be ready for buttons.